A tense standoff. The space station was silent. Too silent. Captain Ray Carter stepped carefully through the dark corridor, his footsteps barely making a sound on the cold metal floor. The air smelled stale, like recycled oxygen that had been running too long without fresh supply. The dim emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. This place had been abandoned, or at least, that's what he thought. Ray adjusted his grip on his pulse rifle. Something felt wrong. He had responded to a distress signal, but there were no signs of life. No bodies, no survivors. Just a dead station floating in deep space. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but he wasn't the kind of man to walk away from a mystery. Then he heard it. A faint sound. A whisper of movement behind him. Ray spun around, raising his rifle. His heart pounded. Nothing. Just empty space and shadows. He exhaled slowly and turned back. That's when he saw her. A figure stood at the end of the corridor, half hidden in darkness. Tall, slender, and dangerous. A pair of piercing silver eyes locked onto him, glowing faintly in the dim light. She was alien, no doubt about it. Her deep blue skin shimmered under the flickering lights, her dark armor covered in scratches and burns. She looked like she had been through hell. And she was pointing a weapon straight at him. Ray froze, his mind racing. Plasma rifle. Fully charged. Finger steady on the trigger. She could fire at any second. He had less than a heartbeat to decide what to do. "Drop your weapon," she ordered. Her voice was sharp, commanding, but there was something else beneath it. Tension. Hesitation. Ray didn't move. He had faced death before. He had looked into the eyes of killers and warlords. This alien girl, she was dangerous, but she wasn't a cold-blooded killer. Not yet. "Not gonna happen," he said calmly. Her grip tightened. "Do it, or I will shoot." "Then shoot," Ray said, taking a slow step forward. "But I don't think you will." Her silver eyes narrowed. The plasma rifle in her hands remained steady, but her breathing was uneven. Ray had been trained to read people, and everything about her screamed conflict. She wasn't sure if she should kill him. That was his opening. "You called for help," he said, nodding toward the blinking distress beacon in the corner of the room. "I answered. If you wanted me dead, you would have shot the second you saw me. So tell me, why am I still alive?" The alien girl flinched just for a second, but Ray caught it. "You're a human," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. He frowned. "Yeah. So?" Her expression darkened. "They warned me about you." That made Ray pause. "Who did?" She didn't answer. Instead, she took a step closer, lowering her rifle slightly, but not enough to let his guard down. Ray's mind raced. The galaxy was full of species, many of whom had never even encountered a human before. Some feared them. Some respected them. But very few truly understood them. This girl, however, she had been told something. Something that made her hesitate. "I'm not your enemy," he said carefully. "But if you fire that rifle, we'll have a real problem." She studied him, as if trying to see through him. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she exhaled sharply and lowered her weapon completely. Ray relaxed, but only slightly. He knew better than to trust too quickly. "Who are you?" he asked. The alien girl hesitated before answering. "Velixuri," she said, "and I need your help." Ray raised an eyebrow. "Could have started with that instead of pointing a gun at me." She gave him a sharp look. "I don't trust humans." Ray smirked. "Yeah. Well, I don't trust aliens with guns, so I guess we're even." A sudden alarm blared through the station, cutting off their conversation. Velixuri's expression shifted instantly, fear and urgency flashing across her face. She turned toward the control panel and cursed in her language. "They found me," she muttered. Ray didn't like the sound of that. "Who?" Velixuri's grip on her rifle tightened. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something different in her eyes. Not just fear, Not just desperation, but a strange kind of hope. "The Zereth Dominion," she said. "And if they catch us, we're both dead." Ray sighed. "Of course we are." Then the station shook as something massive docked onto it. The real fight was about to begin. A dangerous proposition. The emergency alarms howled through the dead station, filling the air with a deafening mourning. Red lights pulsed like a heartbeat, flashing against the cold metal walls. The vibrations beneath Ray Carter's feet told him one thing. Something big had just docked, and it wasn't friendly. Valexeri's silver eyes darted across the control panel. Her fingers flew over the damaged console, trying to access the station's external sensors. The screen flickered, static disrupting the readout, but the message was clear. Zereth Dominion warship detected. Ray tightened his grip on his rifle. "Tell me, Zari, are we running or fighting?" She shot him a sharp glare. "It's Valexeri to you, human. And if we stay here, we die." "Great," Ray muttered, already stepping toward the nearest exit. "Then let's get moving." But Valexeri didn't move. Instead, she turned to him, her expression unreadable, and said something that made him freeze. "We can't just run. I need you." Ray stared at her, disbelief flashing across his face. Just minutes ago, she had a rifle pointed at his head, ready to pull the trigger. Now she wanted his help. He crossed his arms. "That's funny. A few minutes ago, you weren't exactly giving off 'let's be friends' vibes." Valexeri scowled, but there was an urgency in her eyes. "I don't have time to explain everything. But you're a human, and that means you can do things I can't. Things I need." Ray didn't like the sound of that. Such as, a loud metallic clang echoed through the corridors. Something was breaching the outer doors. Valexeri inhaled sharply. "I need you to get me off this station alive." Ray narrowed his eyes. And in return, the station trembled again. They didn't have much time. Valexeri clenched her jaw. She clearly hated saying it. But finally, she spoke. "I'll tell you why the Zereth Dominion fears humans." Ray felt his breath catch for just a second. That was not what he expected. "The Dominion fears a lot of things," he said cautiously. "Why would I care?" Valexeri stepped closer, her silver eyes burning with something that made Ray's skin crawl. "Because, human," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "they believe your kind is supposed to be extinct." Ray's stomach tightened. What the hell did that mean? But before he could respond, the airlock doors exploded inward with a deafening boom. Ray instinctively dove behind cover as the shockwave blasted through the room, sending sparks and metal fragments flying. Smoke filled the air, and through the haze, he saw them. Zereth enforcers. Tall, armored figures stepped through the breach, their black exosuits reflecting the red warning lights. They moved in perfect formation, weapons raised, scanning the room with glowing visors. They didn't hesitate. They opened fire. Ray ducked as plasma rounds slammed into the walls, scorching the metal. He rolled behind an overturned console, gripping his rifle. "Guess that's our answer," he shouted over the chaos. Valexeri was already moving. She flipped behind cover, returning fire with deadly precision. Her plasma bolts struck the first enforcer in the chest, sending him crashing backward. But more poured through the breach. "We can't hold them here," she called out. "We need a way out." Ray gritted his teeth. He had to think fast. The station was dead. No security, no defenses. But he had one advantage. "They think humans are extinct, right?" he called out. Valexeri barely glanced at him between shots. "What does that have to do with?" She stopped mid-sentence as Ray did something insane. He stood up, right in the open. The enforcers froze. Their weapons locked onto him. For a brief moment, the air was thick with shock. And then one of the Zereth soldiers whispered in a language Ray didn't understand. But he understood the fear in their voice. "It's real." Ray smirked. "That's right, you bastards." Then he fired. His first shot slammed into the lead enforcer's visor, sending them stumbling back. The others panicked. Their formation broke, and that was all the opening Ray needed. "Go!" he shouted at Vale Xeri. She didn't hesitate. She fired 2 more shots, then turned and bolted toward the maintenance tunnel. Ray was right behind her. The enforcers recovered fast, but it was too late. Ray and Vale Xeri were already through the emergency hatch, sealing it behind them. They sprinted through the dark corridor, their boots echoing against the metal floor. Ray's mind raced. They called me it. They weren't expecting a human. He glanced at Vale Xeri. She had answers, and after this mess, he was damn well going to get them. Ahead, the emergency escape pod bay came into view. A single shuttle remained, barely functional but still operational. Vale Xeri skidded to a stop, turning to him. "Get in." Ray hesitated. "Not until you tell me what the hell is going on." "Ray," she snapped, "they will kill you if they catch you. Do you really think the Dominion will let a human walk away?" Ray cursed under his breath. He hated being left in the dark. But she was right. They had no time. He climbed into the pilot's seat, gripping the controls. The engines roared to life, and Vale Xeri jumped into the co-pilot's seat. The shuttle blasted out of the station just as the Xerath enforcers breached the last door. Plasma fire chased them into space, but they were gone. As the burning wreckage of the station shrank behind them, Ray let out a long breath. Then he turned to Vale Xeri. "All right," he said. "We're off your station. Now start talking." Vale Xeri looked at him, her expression grim. "You think you know the galaxy, human," she said. "You don't. Not yet. But you will." And for the first time in a long time, Ray Carter had the sinking feeling that he was in way over his head. Escape or death? The shuttle rocketed through the darkness of space, engines burning hot as it twisted through the debris field surrounding the dead station. Plasma bolts streaked past like shooting stars, missing by inches. The Xerath warship had already launched pursuit fighters, sleek black craft that moved with terrifying precision. Ray Carter gritted his teeth, gripping the controls as he forced the battered shuttle into a sharp dive. The frame rattled violently, warning sirens blaring in his ears. "We are not going to make it at this speed." Vale Xeri shouted over the chaos. She was strapped into the co-pilot's seat, frantically scanning the ship's failing systems. "You got a better idea," Ray barked, yanking the controls to avoid another barrage. Vale Xeri's silver eyes flashed as she accessed the ship's limited weapon systems. "Yes. Hold them steady for 5 seconds. 5 seconds. That's a lifetime in a dogfight. Then fly it like your life depends on it, because it does." Ray clenched his jaw and made his decision. Fine. Trust the alien. The moment the ship steadied, Vale Xeri activated the ship's rear thrusters at full power, then simultaneously fired a cluster of proximity mines into the path of the pursuing fighters. The explosion was instant. A shockwave rippled through space, consuming 2 Xerath fighters in fiery destruction. The third pilot swerved at the last second, barely escaping the blast. "Nice shot," Ray admitted, but the moment of victory was short-lived. The warship wasn't giving up. It was charging a gravlock field, a deadly trap that would freeze their ship in place like an insect caught in a web. "We need a hyperspace jump," Vale Xeri shouted. Ray laughed bitterly. "And where exactly do you want me to jump? This thing barely has functioning stabilizers." Vale Xeri's fingers danced over the nav computer, her expression desperate. "Set course for Exile Drift." Ray's stomach twisted. "Are you crazy? That place is." A deep, bone-rattling hum vibrated through their ship. The gravlock field was activating. No time. Ray punched the hyperdrive. The moment the engines roared to full power, the shuttle surged forward. Stars stretched into long streaks of white light, and just as the gravlock pulsed, they were gone. Silence. For the first time in what felt like hours, there was nothing but the hum of the ship and the deep black void of hyperspace outside the cockpit window. Ray exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. "Hell of a ride," he muttered. Valexari slumped in her seat, breathing heavily. "We barely made it." Ray leaned back, running a hand through his short brown hair. "Okay, we're alive. Now you tell me what the hell is going on." Valexari didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked toward the back of the cramped shuttle, opening a hidden compartment beneath the floor. From inside, she pulled out a metallic cube, a data storage unit unlike anything Ray had ever seen. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This is why the Dominion wants me dead," she said. Ray eyed the device warily. "Looks like a fancy paperweight. What's inside?" Valexari hesitated. Then, with slow deliberation, she activated the cube. A holographic projection erupted into the air, filling the room with shimmering golden light. Ray's breath caught. It was a star map. But not just any map. This was ancient. The markings weren't Zereth, nor were they from any modern galactic empire. The coordinates weren't even recognizable. But one symbol stood out. A single, unmistakable sigil. The insignia of old Earth. Ray's blood ran cold. "This is impossible," he murmured. Valexari looked him dead in the eye. "Your people were never supposed to see this." Ray felt his pulse pounding in his ears. "Why? What is this?" Valexari's voice was quiet. "It's proof that humans were once the dominant power of the galaxy, and the Zereth Dominion has spent centuries hiding that truth." Ray took a step back, shaking his head. "That doesn't make sense. Humanity was barely getting into interstellar travel a few centuries ago. We were never a galactic empire." Valexari's silver eyes gleamed in the dim light. "That's what they want you to believe." Ray didn't know whether to laugh or panic. "So let me get this straight. You're telling me that humans ruled the stars long before the Dominion, and they've been covering it up. That they wiped our history clean and made us believe we were just another species clawing our way into space." Valexari nodded. "Exactly." Ray let out a shaky breath. "That's insane." "Is it?" Valexari challenged. "Think about it. Why does the Dominion fear humans? Why do they react with pure terror when they see you? It's not because they think you're weak. It's because they remember." Ray swallowed hard. This was too big, too impossible. And yet, it explained everything. The way the Zereth enforcers had hesitated when they saw him. The way they whispered in fear. The way Valexari, a warrior of the Dominion, had chosen to trust him over her own kind. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Ray exhaled. "All right," he said. "Let's say I believe you. What do we do now?" Valexari's expression darkened. "We go to Exile Drift," she said. "There's someone there who can tell us everything." Ray folded his arms. "And who exactly are we meeting?" Valexari hesitated before answering. "An old human," she said softly. "One who remembers the war that erased your people from history." Ray felt a shiver run down his spine. Something told him that whatever they were about to uncover, it was only the beginning. The truth behind the mission. The hum of the ship's engines filled the small cabin, steady and rhythmic, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. The cockpit lights cast a dim glow over Ray Carter's face as he sat in the pilot's chair, arms crossed, staring at Valexari. The weight of her words still hung heavy in the air. Humans had once ruled the stars. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet the evidence, the star map with Earth's insignia, was floating right in front of him in shimmering gold light. Ray finally exhaled, shaking his head. "Start talking, Xari." Valexari, sitting across from him, narrowed her silver eyes. "It's Valexari." "Sure, but right now I don't really care about proper names. What I care about is why the hell the Dominion has been erasing human history." Valexari let out a slow breath and leaned back in her chair. She looked tired, like a woman carrying the weight of a dying civilization on her shoulders. "Because humans were never supposed to come back," she said at last. Ray raised an eyebrow. "Come back from what?" She hesitated before answering. "From annihilation." Ray's stomach clenched. He didn't like where this was going. "You mean a war?" Velixeri nodded. "Not just a war. The war. The war that nearly wiped the Zereth Dominion out of existence. The war your kind should have won." Ray leaned forward. "Should have." Velixeri tapped a button on the console. The holographic map changed, zooming in on a cluster of red-marked systems. "These were once human strongholds," she explained. "Your ancestors weren't just explorers. They were conquerors, scientists, builders, warriors. They expanded through the stars faster than any species before them. But they weren't invincible." She looked at him, her gaze unyielding. "And something broke them." Ray frowned. "You're saying humanity had a galactic empire, and then it just vanished?" "Yes." Ray scoffed. "That doesn't make any sense. If we were powerful enough to control entire systems, how did we lose everything?" Velixeri hesitated. "The Dominion didn't fight that war alone." Ray narrowed his eyes. "Who else was involved?" A muscle in Velixeri's jaw twitched. She was struggling to say the words. Then, finally, she whispered, "Your own kind." Ray's blood turned ice cold. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. No, that doesn't make sense. Humans weren't spacefaring until a few centuries ago." Velixeri's voice was quiet. "Because the ones who survived started over." Ray stared at her. His mouth went dry. "You're saying," he swallowed, "you're saying there were two factions of humans, one that fought the war and one that got left behind." Velixeri nodded. "The humans that remained on Earth, they're the survivors, the ones who lost." Ray's heart pounded in his chest. If this was true, then we're the remnants, he muttered. "A forgotten species." Velixeri looked at him with something that almost resembled pity. "And now that the Dominion has realized humans are growing stronger again, they'll do everything to make sure history doesn't repeat itself." Ray rubbed his temples. This was too much, too big. It changed everything. For centuries, Earth had thought of itself as a young race in an ancient galaxy. Scrappy, climbing up the ladder. But if Velixeri was telling the truth, then humans weren't just another species. They were returning. Ray exhaled sharply and sat forward, his hands gripping the console. "And you? Why are you telling me this? Why betray your own people?" Velixeri clenched her fists. "Because the Dominion lie to us too. They tell us humans are monsters, that we should fear you. But when I looked into those soldiers' eyes back on the station, when they saw you, they weren't filled with hatred." She locked eyes with him. They were filled with terror. Ray let that sink in. The Dominion, the most powerful empire in the galaxy, was afraid. A slow smirk formed on his lips. "Good." Velixeri blinked in surprise. "What?" Ray leaned back in his chair. "If they're scared of us, that means we still have a chance." Velixeri hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Which is why we need to reach Exile Drift. There's someone there who knows the full story. Someone who can tell us what really happened." Ray frowned. "Who?" Velixeri's voice was quiet. "A human. One of the last survivors from the original war." Ray's eyes widened. "You mean?" She nodded. "He fought in it. He remembers." The ship suddenly shuddered. Alarms flared across the control panel. Ray's stomach dropped. Please tell me we didn't just get pulled out of hyperspace." Velixeri checked the readings, her face paling. "We've got company." Ray didn't need to ask who. He already knew. The Dominion had found them. And this time, they weren't sending just enforcers. They were sending their executioners. Betrayal and survival. The shuttle lurched violently, throwing Ray Carter forward in his seat. Warning lights flashed red across the cockpit as the ship was yanked out of hyperspace like a fish caught in a net. The sickening jolt sent every system screaming. Shields failing, thrusters offline, power fluctuating. Ray's gut clenched. They had been pulled into an interdiction field, which meant only one thing. The Dominion had found them. Valexuri's silver eyes darted to the scanner, her expression tightening. A single warship, she muttered. Medium class. Heavily armed. Ray cursed under his breath. Just one. Valexuri shot him a sharp look. One is enough. If they've sent a Warden-class hunter ship, we are not winning this fight. Ray clenched his jaw. He wasn't the type to run, but he wasn't stupid either. A fully operational Dominion hunter ship could shred their barely functioning shuttle in seconds. Their only chance was escape. He gripped the controls and tried to restart the thrusters, but the ship barely responded. The interdiction field was cutting off their power, trapping them like a bug under glass. A cold chill crept up Ray's spine. This wasn't a normal intercept. They weren't destroying the shuttle. They were taking it. A deep metallic voice crackled through the comms, filling the cabin with a distorted growl. Human vessel, power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Ray exchanged a glance with Valexuri. Not the kind of invitation I was hoping for. She didn't smile. Instead, her face was grim. They want you alive. Ray arched an eyebrow. Me? What about you? Valexuri didn't answer right away. That alone sent alarms blaring in his mind. Then, slowly, she reached for the console and disabled their shields. Ray's eyes widened. What the hell are you doing? The ship shuddered as the warship's tractor beam locked onto them, pulling them in like prey caught in a hunter's grasp. Valexuri exhaled. Saving your life. Before Ray could react, she slammed a stun charge against his chest. Electricity surged through him. His muscles locked, his vision went white, and the last thing he saw before collapsing was Valexuri standing over him, looking regretful. And then, darkness. The enemy's hands. Ray woke up to cold metal against his skin. His head pounded, his limbs felt heavy, and a dull ache burned through his chest where the stun charge had hit him. His wrists were bound behind his back in heavy restraints, locked into a curved metal chair. The air smelled sterile, metallic, controlled. A prison cell. He exhaled sharply. Damn it. Footsteps. He forced his eyes open, blinking against the harsh white lights above. The room was simple, smooth black walls, a single steel door, and a Dominion insignia carved into the center. And standing in front of him was Valexuri. Ray's blood boiled. His instincts screamed at him to lunge, fight, break free. But the restraints held him tight. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Valexuri spoke first. You're awake. Ray scoffed, shaking his head. You set me up. Her expression didn't change. I did what I had to do. Ray leaned forward as much as the restraints allowed, his voice a low growl. You handed me over to the Dominion. After everything. After I saved your life. Valexuri's silver eyes flickered, not with anger, but something else. Guilt? I didn't have a choice, she said quietly. Ray laughed bitterly. There's always a choice, princess. The steel door behind her slid open. A Zereth commander stepped in. He was tall, clad in deep black armor with blood-red etchings across the chest plate. His skin was dark, almost obsidian, and his piercing golden eyes locked onto Ray with a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled disgust. Ray had met men like him before, men who thought they were untouchable. The commander took a slow step forward, studying him like a predator assessing wounded prey. The last human we captured begged before the end, the commander mused. I wonder, will you? Ray gave him a lopsided grin. Depends. Are you gonna start monologuing first? Because I gotta tell you, I always fall asleep during the villain speeches. The commander's expression remained cold. He turned to Velixari. "You have done well, Lieutenant. The High Warden will reward your loyalty." Ray froze. "Lieutenant." His jaw clenched. He slowly turned his gaze back to Velixari. She met his eyes but didn't say a word. The pieces clicked. The way she knew too much about the Dominion. The way she had access to their classified information. The way she had led him straight into their hands. Ray exhaled a quiet laugh. "You were never a fugitive, were you?" Velixari didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. Ray leaned back against the cold metal, nodding slowly. "All right, you got me." His voice was eerily calm. "Now tell me, what's the bounty on my head these days?" The commander smirked. "You think you are valuable enough for a bounty?" He leaned in close, his golden eyes burning into Ray's. "No, human. You are a relic. A mistake that should have stayed buried. We do not sell ghosts. We erase them." Ray felt the cold weight of those words settle over him. This wasn't about capturing him. This was about making sure humanity never rose again. The commander turned away. "Prepare him for interrogation." Two heavily armed enforcers stepped in. Ray felt the restraints unlock as they yanked him forward. His body was still sluggish from the stun charge, but his mind was racing. He had one chance to turn this around. And strangely, it all depended on Velixari. Ray glanced at her one last time as the guards dragged him away. And for a split second, just a fraction of a second, he saw it. Not cold betrayal, not indifference. Regret. She had played her role well. But something told Ray this wasn't over. Not by a long shot, the ultimate deception. The cold metal walls of the Dominion prison cell seemed to press in around Ray Carter, the silence heavier than the chains binding his wrists. The room was empty except for the reinforced chair he was shackled to, a single dim light casting long shadows against the dark walls. He could still hear the commander's parting words ringing in his ears. "We do not sell ghosts. We erase them." Ray exhaled through his nose, slowly testing the restraints. Solid. No weak points. He wasn't getting out of this by brute force. And then there was Velixari. The image of her standing still, cold and silent while the Dominion took him burned into his mind. He had trusted her, fought beside her, and she had sold him out. But then, that moment, that brief, flickering second where he had seen something different in her silver eyes. Regret. Ray gritted his teeth. That meant something. A soft hiss of air filled the room. The heavy steel door slid open, and in walked the commander. Ray barely reacted, but he took in everything. The way the Dominion officer carried himself, the way his fingers rested lightly on the ceremonial dagger at his waist, the way his golden eyes studied him like an insect pinned to a board. The commander stopped a few feet away, clasping his hands behind his back. "Humans are remarkable," he mused. "So fragile, so resilient. It is almost frustrating." Ray smirked. "You know, you guys talk a lot of game for an empire that's terrified of a single human." The commander's eyes flashed. He stepped forward, and without warning, punched Ray in the gut. Ray gasped as pain exploded through his ribs. The chair rattled under the force, but he forced himself to stay upright. He let out a slow breath, chuckling through the pain. "Oh yeah, you're definitely not scared." The commander grabbed Ray's jaw, forcing him to look up. His grip was ice cold. "You are mistaken, Relic. We do not fear you." His fingers tightened. "We fear what you could become." Ray narrowed his eyes. "There it is." The commander released him, stepping back with a slow exhale. He studied Ray for a long moment before speaking again. "Your ancestors did not merely conquer the stars. They were something else." He paced the room, his voice low. "We do not know why, but humans, your kind, have an ability that no other species in the galaxy possesses." Ray frowned. "And what's that?" The commander stopped walking. His golden eyes gleamed. "You adapt." The word hung in the air like a curse. When the Dominion waged war against the ancient humans, we outnumbered them, outgunned them, and still, they survived. When their planets burned, they did not submit. They grew stronger, more ruthless, more dangerous. The commander's voice grew darker. And now you crawl back from the void, forgetting what you once were. But we have not forgotten. Ray's jaw clenched. He had spent his whole life believing humanity was just one of many species in the galaxy, fighting for its place. But if what this commander was saying was true, humans weren't rising. They were returning. The commander turned to the door. You will never leave this ship, human. Your body will be disposed of, and your existence erased. The Dominion will ensure your species remains nothing more than a forgotten myth. The door hissed open. Ray exhaled slowly. That's disappointing. I was really looking forward to seeing how this all plays out. The commander scoffed. There is nothing left to play. And then, the lights cut out. A sudden boom rocked the entire ship. The commander spun around, eyes flashing in alarm. The dim emergency lights flickered on as red warning signals blared throughout the room. Ray smirked. Finally. The door slammed open again, but this time, it wasn't the Dominion coming through. It was Vale Exari. And she was armed. Ray blinked in shock as she stormed in, a plasma rifle clutched in her hands. Her silver eyes locked onto his, filled with something he hadn't seen before. Determination. What the hell? Shut up and move, she snapped, blasting his restraints apart. The energy cuffs disintegrated, and Ray stumbled forward, rubbing his sore wrists. Okay, you have a lot to explain later, Ray muttered, snatching the commander's dagger from his belt before the stunned officer could react. The commander lunged at Vale Exari, but she moved faster, slamming the butt of her rifle into his head. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Ray whistled. Didn't hold back, huh? Vale Exari grabbed his arm and yanked him toward the hallway. We don't have time for your jokes, Carter. The ship is on high alert. We need to get to the hangar now. As they sprinted through the corridors, alarms blaring all around them, Ray finally spoke. So what's the deal, Exari? You selling me out again, or are we actually on the same side this time? Vale Exari didn't look at him. I never sold you out. Ray scoffed. Could have fooled me. She whirled on him so fast he almost ran into her. Do you really think they would have let me walk away with you if I hadn't played my part? She hissed. They needed to believe I was still loyal. If I had refused to turn you in, we both would have been executed. This was the only way to get you close enough to escape. Ray stared at her. He had been so sure, so damn sure she had betrayed him. But the way she looked at him now, angry, but not hateful, resentful, but not of him. She had risked everything to get him out. Ray let out a long sigh, shaking his head. Next time, give me a warning before you zap me unconscious, yeah. Vale Exari rolled her eyes and took off down the corridor again. Next time, don't make it so easy. They burst into the hangar. A sleek black Dominion attack shuttle sat in the center, engines already powering up. Ray raised an eyebrow. Nice ship. Whose is it? Vale Exari smirked. Ours, if we survive. Ray grinned. That's the best kind of plan. Blaster fire erupted behind them. Dominion enforcers. Ray and Vale Exari sprinted up the ramp as plasma bolts seared past them. Ray spun, hurling the stolen dagger into the chest of the nearest enforcer. The alien collapsed as Ray slammed the door shut behind them. Vale Exari jumped into the pilot's seat. Hold on. Ray barely had time to strap in before the ship launched out of the hangar, weaving between Dominion warships. Alarms blared as enemy fighters gave chase. Ray turned to Vale Exari, grinning. You know, for someone who betrayed me, you're doing a hell of a job getting me out of here. Vale Exari didn't glance away from the controls. I told you before, she said. Her silver eyes met his. I need you alive. Ray exhaled. Something told him that was just the beginning of the storm that was coming. Humanity's answer. The Dominion attack shuttle shot through the void of space, its blackened hull blending into the darkness. Ray Carter gripped the co-pilot's seat as Velixeri pushed the engines to their limits. The ship vibrated under the strain, alarms screaming from the control panels. Behind them, an entire fleet of Dominion warships loomed, closing in like a pack of hungry predators. Ray glanced at the rear scanners. 3 pursuit fighters were locked onto them, plasma cannons charging. "This would be a really bad time to tell me you don't know how to fly this thing," he muttered. Velixeri's silver eyes burned with focus. "If you doubt my skills, I can throw you out the airlock." Ray smirked. "Now there's the warm and friendly personality I've come to admire." A plasma blast grazed the ship's wing, sending a jolt through the cabin. Ray gritted his teeth. "Okay, jokes later. Right now, we need an actual escape plan." Velixeri was already pulling up the star map, scanning for the nearest system. "There's a warp gate just outside this sector." Ray narrowed his eyes. "That's Dominion-controlled space. They'll have it locked down." Velixeri didn't look up. "Not if we use an old human trick." Ray raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what would that be?" She smirked. "We cheat." Before he could respond, Velixeri abruptly cut the ship's main thrusters, sending them into a sharp dive. The enemy fighters streaked forward at full speed, their weapons primed to fire, only to realize too late that their target had disappeared beneath them. Ray's stomach lurched as the shuttle flipped end over end. Velixeri reactivated the thrusters at full burn, launching them back up into the blind spot behind the Dominion fighters. Ray barked out a laugh. "You really do know how to fly." Velixeri smirked. "Hold on." The ship's weapon systems activated. A pair of heat-seeking plasma torpedoes locked onto the enemy fighters. Velixeri pressed the trigger. Boom! The torpedoes streaked forward, slamming into the Dominion ships with a fiery explosion. Ray exhaled. 2 down. 1 to go. Velixeri's voice was calm, controlled. She flipped a switch, engaging the rear-mounted pulse cannons. The last fighter barely had time to react before its cockpit was vaporized by a precise burst of fire. Ray let out a slow whistle. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." Velixeri didn't reply. She was already focused on the warp gate ahead, a shimmering blue portal hovering in the depths of space. It pulsed with energy, a gateway leading to the unknown. Ray's stomach twisted. He knew where this led. Exile drift. The last place in the galaxy where the truth still lived. He leaned forward. "You sure about this?" Velixeri didn't hesitate. "It's the only way." The Dominion warships were closing in, their long-range weapons preparing to fire. They had one chance. Velixeri gritted her teeth and slammed the warp drive. The engines screamed in protest, but they held. The shuttle surged forward, just as the Dominion warships opened fire. For a split second, Ray saw the plasma beams racing toward them. A direct hit would mean instant vaporization. And then, they vanished into the warp gate. Exile drift, the last refuge of the forgotten. The moment they emerged from the warp gate, everything changed. The stars were different. The space around them was unnaturally quiet, like stepping into a graveyard. Ray frowned. "Where are we?" Velixeri checked the scanners. "We made it." Exile drift. Ray peered out of the cockpit window, scanning the region ahead. It was unlike any system he had ever seen. Floating in the distance was a colossal structure, larger than any station known to humanity. It looked ancient, its metallic surface scarred and weathered. The sheer size of it defied logic, stretching beyond what Ray could measure with the naked eye. "What the hell is that?" Ray muttered. Velixeri exhaled. "The last remnant of the old world, the place where your ancestors made their last stand." Ray's breath caught. This was it, the last stronghold of the ancient human empire. Before he could process the weight of it, a voice crackled over the ship's comms. "Unknown vessel, state your identity." Ray's heartbeat quickened. He recognized the voice instantly. It was human. He exchanged a look with Velixeri. She simply nodded. Ray leaned forward and pressed the comms button. "This is Captain Ray Carter. We're seeking asylum." A long silence followed. Then, "Proceed to docking bay 3. Ray exhaled slowly. They were in. The last human general. The docking bay was quiet. No guards, no soldiers, just the eerie stillness of a place lost in time. Ray and Velixeri stepped off the shuttle. The air was thin, but breathable. The metallic floors were smooth, untouched by the wear and tear of modern stations. Then, footsteps echoed. A figure stepped forward from the shadows. An old man. His face was lined with scars, his hair silver, his stance rigid like a soldier who had never stopped being one. He wore a uniform unlike anything Ray had ever seen, black and gold, marked with a forgotten insignia. Ray instinctively straightened. The old man studied him, really studied him. And then, finally, he spoke. "You're late." Ray blinked. "Excuse me." The old man smirked. "I've been waiting a long time for one of you to show up." Ray's skin prickled. "One of us." Before he could ask, the man turned his gaze to Velixeri. His smirk faded. "And you? I never thought I'd see a Zereth willingly walk into these halls." Velixeri met his gaze without flinching. "The Dominion has lied to us all." The old man nodded. "Yes, they have." He exhaled. "Come inside. There is much to discuss." Ray hesitated. "Who are you?" The old man turned back to him, and for the first time, Ray saw something behind his weathered gaze. A spark of recognition. A knowing look, like he had seen Ray before. "My name," the old man said, "is General Elias Rourke, and I am the last survivor of the war that erased your people from history." Ray felt his heart stop. Everything he thought he knew, everything about humanity's place in the galaxy, was about to change. Forever. The war that never ended. The silence in the ancient docking bay stretched between them. Ray Carter stood frozen, his mind racing as he stared at General Elias Rourke, the man who had just shattered everything he thought he knew. A human general, a survivor from the lost war, the last remnant of an empire that was never supposed to exist. Velixeri was the first to break the silence. "If you're truly a survivor," she said carefully, "then you know what's coming." Rourke's sharp eyes flicked to her. "Yes, and I know what must be done." He turned back to Ray. "But first, I need to know, why are you here?" Ray exhaled, gathering his thoughts. Where did he even begin? The warships, the chase, the Dominion's fear of humanity. Finally, he simply said, "Because we're running out of time." Rourke studied him, then nodded. "Follow me." The Chamber of the Forgotten. Ray and Velixeri followed Rourke through the winding corridors of Exile Drift. The halls were lined with ancient banners, dust-covered insignias of a forgotten past. The air smelled of old steel, machine oil, and history. They reached a vast, circular chamber at the heart of the structure, and what Ray saw made his breath catch. Hundreds of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a human, preserved, frozen in time, warriors from the past. Rourke stood before them, his voice heavy. "These are the last of the old world. The soldiers who refused to surrender when the Dominion wiped out our empire." He turned to Ray. "They'd been sleeping for centuries, waiting for the day we would rise again." Ray stared, disbelief and awe mixing in his chest. "You mean," he swallowed, "they're alive?" Rourke nodded, "But they won't be for long. The stasis systems are failing. Without power, they'll be lost." Ray ran a hand through his hair, trying to process it all. "Then why didn't you wake them up earlier?" Rourke's expression darkened. "Because they can't fight a war alone." The words hit Ray hard. The Dominion wasn't just powerful. It controlled entire star systems, armies of billions, fleets that could erase planets. And humanity. Humanity was scattered, weak, forgotten. Unless. Ray turned to Valixari. You said the Dominion fears what we could become. Valixari nodded. Because they know what's buried here. They've spent centuries making sure no one ever finds out. Rourke's eyes gleamed. And now, thanks to you, Carter, the truth is out. Ray clenched his fists. Everything was falling into place. The Dominion had spent centuries erasing human history. They had hunted anyone who got too close. And now, they knew humanity was waking up. The message to Earth. Rourke stepped toward a massive console at the center of the chamber. It hummed to life as he activated the station's long-range communications array. Ray's chest tightened. He knew what was coming next. Rourke glanced at him. We have one chance to call for help. But if we do this, there's no turning back. Ray's throat was dry. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a leader. But he was human. And humanity didn't run from a fight. He stepped forward. Do it. Rourke nodded, pressing a final command. A deep pulse echoed through the station as the transmission went out, a signal broadcast across every human colony, every hidden outpost, every surviving fleet. A single message. Humanity was never lost, and we are taking back our future. The Dominion's response. The moment the transmission ended, the station's alarms blared. Valixari spun toward the scanners. They found us. Ray's pulse spiked. Already? Rourke clenched his jaw. They were waiting for us to make a move. The holographic display flickered, revealing the incoming Dominion fleet. Hundreds of warships. An armada built to wipe them out. Ray's heart pounded. This was it. They had made their move. Now, the galaxy was watching. Rourke turned to Ray. Are you ready for this? Ray took a breath. He thought about Earth, about the colonies, about the people who had no idea what was coming. Then he smirked. We'll see who's ready for who. As the first Dominion warships broke through Exile Drift's atmosphere, humanity's war for survival began. The first battle of the forgotten. The ground trembled beneath Exile Drift as the Dominion fleet arrived. Ray Carter stood alongside General Elias Rourke and Valixari in the ancient war chamber, the glow of the holographic battlefield display illuminating their faces. Hundreds of red markers, enemy warships, had encircled the station like vultures around a dying beast. They're coming in fast, Valixari muttered, her silver eyes scanning the readings. Their primary warship is launching landing teams. They mean to take this station intact. Rourke smirked. That's their mistake. Ray frowned. Why's that? Rourke turned to him, his expression grim and determined. Because we have the advantage. Ray scoffed. You mean the same advantage that let humanity get wiped out the first time? Rourke shook his head. No, we lost because we played by the rules. The Dominion fights with overwhelming power. We fight with something they can't understand. Ray folded his arms. And that is? Rourke smirked. Survival. Before Ray could ask what that meant, the first explosion rocked the station. The battle had begun. The last soldiers wake. The ancient corridors of Exile Drift shook with the force of impact. The Dominion had begun their ground invasion. Rourke turned to a control panel and pressed a sequence of commands. The stasis pods lining the chamber flared to life. Ray's breath caught as the frozen soldiers of the past, the last warriors of the forgotten human empire, began to wake. Hissing steam poured from the pods as armored figures emerged, their eyes adjusting to the light. One of them, a tall, battle-worn man with scars running across his face, stepped forward, his gaze landing on Rourke. His voice was hoarse, but powerful. General, he said, it's been a long time. Rourke nodded. Longer than we planned, Captain. But we have work to do. The soldier turned, glancing at Ray and Valixari. His sharp eyes analyzed them instantly. This is the best we've got. he asked. Ray smirked. Nice to meet you too, pal. The soldier chuckled. Still got the old human attitude. I see. Then he turned serious. What's our status? Rourke pointed to the holographic battle map. The Dominion is here, and they're about to learn what happens when they wake a sleeping giant. The soldier's smirk faded. He grabbed a plasma rifle from the weapons rack and turned to his waking comrades. Then let's remind them what real war looks like. The battle turns. The Dominion expected an easy victory. They did not expect an army of warriors from the old empire, battle-hardened humans who had trained for one purpose, to take their revenge. The battle in the halls of Exile Drift was unlike anything Ray had ever seen. These weren't just soldiers. They were legends, ghosts of a past war reborn. The Dominion enforcers advanced in tight formations, their elite warriors cutting down resistance with deadly precision. But the old human warriors fought differently. They moved like hunters, using the ancient corridors to set ambushes, cutting through the enemy with brutal efficiency. Ray fought alongside them, his instincts sharp. He had never been a soldier, but he was human, and humans adapted. He took down an enforcer with a single well-placed shot, covering Valexari as she used her Dominion rifle to return fire. You still regret switching sides, Ray shouted over the chaos. Valexari smirked, reloading. Ask me after we win. A massive explosion shook the station, this one from the outside. Rourke's voice came through their comms. Carter, get back to the control room. Now. Ray didn't hesitate. They sprinted through the battle-torn corridors, reaching the war chamber just as the holographic display changed. Ray's heart stopped. The Dominion had brought reinforcements. The impossible counterattack. A second wave of warships had entered the system. Rourke clenched his fists. They're bringing their full fleet. We can't hold out forever. Ray exhaled. Then we don't fight fair. Valexari frowned. What are you thinking? Ray's mind raced. They couldn't win in a straight fight. But what if they didn't have to? He turned to Rourke. How much power does this station still have? Rourke frowned. Why? Ray grinned. Because I have a really stupid idea. The war begins anew. The Dominion fleet closed in, preparing to launch one final attack. Inside Exile Drift, Ray and the last warriors of the human empire prepared their counterstrike. The station was dying, but humanity was waking up, and the galaxy was about to remember why it once feared them. The human gambit. The Dominion warships moved into position, their massive weapons charging for a final annihilation strike against Exile Drift. Inside the dying station, Ray Carter stood at the control panel, heart pounding. His plan was risky, reckless, possibly suicidal. But it was the only chance they had. The plan. Ray turned to Rourke. We can't fight them head-on. But what if we turn the station into a weapon? Rourke frowned. Explain. Ray tapped the console. This station was built for war, right? There's enough raw energy in its core to power an entire fleet. Rourke's eyes widened as he realized what Ray was suggesting. You want to overload the core. Ray nodded. Exactly. We turn Exile Drift into a bomb big enough to take their fleet with it. Valexari exhaled. That will destroy everything, including us. Ray grinned. Not if we time it right. Rourke crossed his arms. You're proposing a controlled detonation, just enough to disable their fleet but keep us alive. Ray's smirk faded. Yeah, if we get it right. If we don't. Valexari sighed. We're space dust. Silence. Then, Rourke nodded. Do it. The last fight. As Ray worked on overloading the station's core, the last of humanity's soldiers prepared for battle. The Dominion forces pushed deeper into the station, overwhelming defenses, storming the ancient halls. The warriors of the old empire met them head-on. The battle was brutal. Close-quarters combat. Blades clashing against energy shields. Gunfire echoing through the corridors. Ray heard the screams through the comms. He forced himself to focus. He had one job. One chance to make sure this wasn't the end. The turning point. The core is ready. Ray shouted. We have 3 minutes before this thing goes critical. Rourke grabbed his comm. All units, fall back to the escape shuttles. Now. But then. The main doors exploded inward. A Dominion warlord stepped through. Towering, clad in black armor, wielding an energy blade twice the size of a man. His glowing golden eyes locked onto Ray. You, he growled. Ray swallowed. Oh, that's not good. Ray's last stand. The warlord moved like a phantom, cutting through human soldiers like they were nothing. Ray barely dodged as the massive blade sliced through the control panel behind him. Sparks exploded everywhere. Valexari fired her rifle, but the warlord deflected the shot with his blade. Okay, Ray muttered. This guy is a problem. He grabbed a plasma pistol from a fallen soldier, rolled across the floor, and fired 3 quick shots. The warlord dodged all of them. Ray exhaled. Really, really big problem. Rourke rushed forward, clashing blades with the warlord, their weapons sparking. Get to the shuttles, Rourke yelled. Ray hesitated, then grabbed Valexari's arm. Come on. They sprinted toward the last escape shuttle as Exile Drift began its final countdown. The explosion that changed everything. As the shuttle launched from the station, Ray watched through the viewport. The Dominion fleet was still closing in. They had no idea what was coming. Then, boom, Exile Drift detonated. A massive shockwave ripped through space, sending Dominion warships spinning out of control. The energy surge fried their systems, leaving them vulnerable. The once invincible fleet was crippled. Humanity had struck back, and the galaxy would never be the same. The future of humanity. As their shuttle drifted through the wreckage, Ray Carter let out a shaky breath. We did it, he murmured. Valexari, exhausted, nodded. For now. Rourke stood at the viewport, watching the destruction. His voice was quiet. This was just the beginning. Ray exhaled. He knew Rourke was right. The Dominion wouldn't forget this, but neither would humanity. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in centuries, it had begun again.